It's 2008 and the Field Museum is just finishing up its busy summer season. Thousands of people will visit this year from all over the world. As I walk up to the second floor and through the Pacific exhibit, I come upon a room that's full of glass display cases. The objects in these cases come from places that sound like dream vacation destinations. Fiji, Samoa, Hawaii, New Zealand. There are grass skirts and spears and enormous drums. Back in one corner, there's a small display of green stones. This case is kind of unassuming. A visitor might not even notice it. But here in this case, there's one carved stone that's about the size of a fist.
Kind of a greenish-gray carved object.
It sort of looks E.T.-like.
Snake-like. It looks kind of like a monkey. And it's kind of weird. Kind of sparkly.
It looks like it's made out of jade.
This thing is called a Hei-Tiki. But what is it? And where did it come from? To answer that, I'm going to go on a journey back in time. Hundreds of years back in time. No one can really say for sure when, exactly. Maybe 500 years ago, maybe only 250. But we can definitely say where. The South Island of New Zealand. This place has tall mountains, marshes, forests, hardwood trees, and on the west coast of the island there's a river. As you walk up the course of the river past rapids, you see bits of green stone flecking the bottom of the riverbed. And there are big boulders nearby. Boulders that might look kind of unremarkable. But these boulders are the only place in the world where you can find a very special, very hard stone.
Greenstone, or Panamu, or New Zealand jade.
That's Dale Simpson, a researcher on Pacific artifacts at the Field Museum. And he can shed some light on how those boulders have become this Hei-Tiki.
In all cases, you start from these large chunks of stone, and then from there, with these little rivets, this stone can then be cracked, hit with other stones, so you can take a manageable chunk out. From there to actually carve, sort of quartz sand would be used to slowly wear away, or abrasion stones, like wet stones, that might have been used to slowly rub the Hei-Tiki on its side down to make its form.
The people who lived here, the Maori people, they didn't have metal tools. But one day, hundreds of years ago, a Maori man cracked open a boulder and started sanding. Dale says that the Maoris rubbed and sanded for weeks, maybe even months. They used the green stone to make lots of objects, clubs and axes and ceremonial pieces. But on this day, this Maori man carved and whittled and sanded until he produced this Hei-Tiki. The pendant is old and it's made of a rare stone. But what was it used for by the Maoris all those years ago? To answer that, I turned to a Maori woman in Chicago, a woman named Coral Chavers.
The Hei-Tiki represents fertility, and it also is a good luck charm. And they say that if you get given a greenstone from a Maori, it's been blessed, and and it's good luck to that person.
And when you get a greenstone from a Maori, it brings the people who had it before you nearer to you. It's sort of like an heirloom. If your grandmother gave you a brooch and then you held it in your hands years later, she would feel closer to you. The man carved the Hei-Tiki using stone tools somewhere between 500 and 250 years ago, and the Hei-Tiki is a kind of heirloom piece. So what happened next? Where did it go after New Zealand? Well, you might be able to guess who came along. It's 1768 and the Europeans show up. These are the first Europeans. Captain James Cook and his crew of scientists and botanists and rough-and-tumble sailors. This is the Captain Cook, the one you read about in high school history. He's legendary both in the West and in the Pacific Islands. He was the first white man to see many parts of the Pacific. Coral told me the story of the arrival as she's heard it.
All of a sudden, our ancestors seen a white-coloured person, somebody totally different, in a big waka, the canoe.
The Maoris are surprised, and at first they tried to fight the Europeans. But then the Maoris realized that the Europeans weren't interested in fighting. Well, not yet. They were interested in trade. So, a lot of objects were traded, but not this Hei-Tiki. This Hei-Tiki was a gift from the Maori chief to Captain Cook, at least according to the records we have at the Field Museum. And then the Hei-Tiki left New Zealand. It traveled with Cook through the Indian Ocean, around the southern tip of Africa, and back up to England. Once it arrived on the shores of Britain, It was sold at auction houses and museum collection sales. There is a story that says it was sold for £100,000 in the early 1800s. Later it was raffled off in a lotto. This information comes from the man who would eventually acquire it and hold on to it for the rest of its time in England. That man is Captain Alfred Walter Francis Fuller, and he is a great Victorian collector. Fuller bought the object in November of 1913 from a man named Spooner. Fuller was a meticulous man, with an enormous collection of ethnographic artifacts from the South Seas, and a great love for collecting. He never went to the Pacific, and he had very little money, but he would dedicate his whole life to building and caring for the collection. In 1956, Fuller knew his health was failing, and he knew that his wife and his child would be left without much money upon his death. And so, despite a lifelong commitment to never sell these objects, he struck a deal with a museum in the far-off city of Chicago, a city known mostly for sausages and organized crime.
Perhaps the most interesting of all the New Zealand objects, and that is the Hei-Tiki.
Before the curator of the Pacific brought everything back to the United States, he and Fuller recorded 6 months of conversations about all of the objects in the collection.
And this is possibly one of the most historical New Zealand pieces existing. As there seems not the slightest doubt that this is one, I think one can say positively is, one of the real Cook specimens.
And after they were done, this Hei-Tiki, carefully packed along with all of the other objects, sailed across the Atlantic and up the St. Lawrence Seaway to Chicago, where it was unpacked and placed into the exhibit where it sits now. So now here I am,